This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, as the jury is about to deliberate in the Donald Trump trial in New York, the criminal trial in New York. I thought it would be a good idea and a good timing for me as a trial lawyer to talk about the jury process, jury deliberations, and things that'll help you as a lens to understand the jury process that's being employed here. And I want to give it to you from a trial lawyer perspective, somebody that's picked dozens of juries and awaited jury verdicts like the one that we're waiting on or will be waiting on in New York. Let me tell you how it starts. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a cheat sheet, which is my cheat sheet. I start with a chart. It starts with a chart that lists all of the jurors and all of their information, all of their demographics, their occupation, their education, any comments or statements about where they get their news from, strong opinions they might hold. That was developed during the voir dire process, which is the jury selection process where you winnow down a large pool of potential jurors into your final jury pool. We've got 12 jurors and we've got a number of alternates who will be dismissed as soon as, because none of these jurors have been replaced. It's interesting. We've got a 6-week trial or so, 20 trial witnesses, days on end of trial testimony, haven't lost a witness. Not only have we not lost a witness, just to kind of get into the mind and the psychology of this jury as it starts to act as and has been acting as a new community, right? They've been lashed together. They were strangers before, but now they are forevermore are now the Trump 12. At least for the very first criminal trial in 257 years of a former president. This will be in their obituary. They're anonymous now, but I assure you they won't be anonymous when this is all over. Not because of us. We're not going to out them, but because they'll either come out, somebody will write a book, they'll be interviewed, something's going to happen. And we're going to know about a number of these jurors. And those people that elect to out themselves, hopefully, and not be outed or doxxed by the Trump side, will go down in history in the first line in their obituary, I'm sure you will be, they were on the Trump jury. So we start with that process, right? We talked about it in prior hot takes and on Legal AF. You bring in a jury panel, a jury veneer. It was 300 or 400 in total that got called down with a jury notice, a jury summons to come to court, and then you start bringing them in and filling the box, the 12-person box, and then other areas in the courtroom, 20, 30, 40 at a time. And then the lawyers, using a questionnaire, ask questions. The judge asks questions. Can you be fair and impartial? They try to get to the bottom of it. There's challenges, to bounce certain potential jurors that get used by both sides and exhausted by both sides. The judge, for cause, can get rid of some of them after the peremptory challenges, the challenge for any reason get used up by both sides. And now you have your panel. You've got your 12 in the box, as we say, and you've got 3 or 4 alternates. And again, no alternate has been substituted in for any of the original jurors. So if you heard about the jury selection process 6 weeks ago, it's the same 12. And those alternates will be dismissed when they start deliberating. To answer a question, if during deliberation some juror goes down, sick, ill, or whatever, that's a problem. They'll try to delay the deliberation, but they're not going to be able to replace them with a dismissed alternate. An alternate is only has to be in the trial setting and then be replaced during the trial itself before the deliberation process. I don't think that's an issue here, but I wanted you to understand it from a process, a little bit of a teachable moment here. So I got my chart. As I said at the top, it starts with a chart. And in my boxes, 6 on top, 6 on the bottom, are the 12 jurors. Not by name. So even if you zoom in on this, you're not going to see names because we don't have names. Because the judge, using his inherent authority, properly made them anonymous. But we know their statistics. It's been reported over and over again about who's male and who's female and who's got what job and where do they live in the city and all of that. So I want to go over that. Again, this is not outing them. This is all, you can pull it from anywhere. Guardian, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. I've kind of put it all together, but I'm doing it through the lens of an experienced trial lawyer. In New York, the very first person in the box is the jury foreperson when they go back to deliberate. Other states, you pick the jury foreperson. That's the first thing the jury does. Well, first thing they do is pick lunch. There's a menu that goes around. Who got the tuna wrap? Who got the hamburger? Who got the chicken salad? And then they usually pick the jury, the jury foreperson. But not in New York. We save time. New York. Expedite it. Go right to it. First person in the box, boom. It's a male. Remember, we have 7 men and 5 women in the jury. Juror number 1 is in sales. He lives in West Harlem, which for those that don't follow is in the upper part of New York, which west would probably mean west of Broadway, probably in the 100s if you're following along in the calibration of Manhattan Island. It's probably he's somewhere in the upper 90s to hundreds before you get to Washington Heights. He gets his information from the New York Times and from MSNBC and Fox. He has some college degree. He's single, lives in West Harlem. He's a male. I'd read another reporting that he came originally from Ireland. That's juror number 1, the foreperson. Juror number 2, male, is an investment banker with an MBA, with a Master's of Business Administration, lives in Hell's Kitchen, which is sort of an area in the 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue, in the 30s and 40s in Manhattan. He listens to podcasts, including those involving Michael Cohen, and has read things about Michael Cohen. And he's also believed that at one point Trump did do some good things while he was president. And that's juror number 2. Remember, all of them said they could be fair and impartial regardless of their opinions. Juror number 3 is one of 2 attorneys on the panel. He's in corporate law, not a litigator like me or a trial lawyer. He does transactional law. He lives in Chelsea in New York. He gets his information from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and he appears to be relatively young in his career, in his 20s or 30s. I would think he's 5 to 8 years out of law school. Juror number 4 is a male. We have 4 males in a row. This is the front row. He's a security engineer from the West Village of Manhattan. It's like kind of a section of Greenwich Village. And that is juror number 4. We don't know much more about that particular juror. Juror number 5 is female. She's youngish, as we can tell. She's a teacher. She lives in Harlem, sort of that same section I described with juror number 1. He's at one point during voir dire, she said she liked Donald Trump because he speaks his mind, and I'd rather have that than some other person. And she listens to podcasts. There's been some speculation that juror number 5 might be a little bit more pro-Trump than others. I'll just leave it at that. Juror number 6 is a female. So the first row is male, 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 female, female. Juror number 6 is female. She's a software engineer. She lives in Chelsea also, just like juror number 3. She gets her information from the New York Times, from Facebook. And I would say, based on some of the other reporting, that she appears to be a Democrat. That's just my own opinion. Juror number 7 is the second attorney on the panel. Lives in the Upper East Side of New York, which generally means 5th Avenue to FDR Drive. Upper East Side usually means the 60s. There's always a fight about what is the Upper East Side. The 60s up till about the 90s in terms of streets, and I gave you the avenues. That's Upper East Side. At one time, I lived on the Upper East Side, so I kind of know that area relatively well. That's an attorney. This is a litigator. So this is a person that practices in courts, but not in criminal, but in civil. And to answer a question about lawyers on panels like this one, jury science tells us that it is likely that the jury will look to the attorneys to help them, to guide them through the law, although they are not the jury foreperson. Jury foreperson has all the responsibility. But these people are trained in the law. One's a corporate lawyer, one's a civil lawyer. They don't have criminal experience, but they did take criminal law in law school because you have to. It's one of the 5 core courses. And they had to take the bar exam, and there were criminal questions on there as well. So, I mean, they know enough to be dangerous, but that's the problem. You don't want them overly influencing, as the jury's supposed to be focused on the facts and law as presented by the law as presented by the judge, who is the only lawgiver in the room, and the facts are the facts as developed in the courtroom and the evidence that was presented. So, you don't want a runaway jury, right? Or what we call jury nullification, where they ignore the facts in the law and they kind of come up with their own, like they create their own law. That's not quite right by these two lawyers who don't practice in this area. So there's always that worry, and I'm sure the judge will look to the two lawyers not to try to Bigfoot the process, even though the jurors may naturally gravitate to them like a moth to a flame. Juror number 8, this is now in the second row, is a male, a retired wealth manager who worked for a well-known firm, Upper East Side as well. Gets his information from the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Said he had strong opinions about Trump, didn't want to express them, but said he could be fair and impartial. You can do the math on that one. Number 9 is a female. She's a speech therapist. She also lives on the Upper East Side. So we got 3 people from the Upper East Side all next to each other, jurors 7, 8, and 9. We then have, that's all we really know about the speech therapist. She said she's open-minded and not very political. Number 10 is a male. He works in e-commerce. He's a, he's a, trying to see what kind of company he works for. Well, he's in e-commerce. He lives in Murray Hill. Shout out to Murray Hill. That's where my law firm is. It's just in the 30s between, there's always an argument on this one too, between First Avenue and Fifth Avenue in the 30s, kind of in the shadow of Grand Central Station. That's Murray Hill. Gets his information from the New York Times and podcasts. We can only hope Legal AF. Number 11, 2 more to go. Female. 2 females sitting next to each other, 11 and 12. 11 is a product development manager, lives in Upper Manhattan, which I would think is kind of maybe in the Harlem, Washington Heights area, for those that follow. Doesn't like Trump personally, and had a friend that was convicted of financial fraud. That is juror number 11. Juror number 12 is lives on the Upper East Side, listens to religious podcasts, and is a physical therapist. So there you have the 5 women and the 7 men and the 4 person that make up it based on the chart, right? It starts with the chart. And lawyers use this. Trust me, when they were doing their closing argument or summations, the lawyers knew who all these people were. Anonymous to us, not anonymous to them. And kind of, I'm sure, focused their attention on certain of these things. Maybe the lawyers at certain times, or the person they think is on their side, or, the person who liked Donald Trump for his strong opinions, something like that, while they're making the presentation. Now we've got jury instructions has happened, and the jury goes back to deliberate. 4-person already decided. And then they start, they're really on their own. They're given their jury instructions. They're not given them in writing. They can ask for them. They can ask for things to be read back to them. They can ask for evidence to come into the room. They can ask for all of the physical evidence to be brought into the room. It's not that much physical evidence here. Text messages, WhatsApp messages, emails, the ledgers showing the purportedly fraudulent entries, the checks written by Donald Trump, et cetera, the audio recordings. They have access to all that. They just have to ask for it in the New York process as opposed to already being in the room. And if they want testimony read back, even though there are daily transcripts, they don't get the daily transcripts. They have to have, according to our colleague Karen Friedman-Agnifilo, they have to have the court reporter read back the part and find it and read back the part of the testimony. We want to hear from David Becker on day 1. Hopefully they have good notes and memories. We want to hear from Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. That all gets read back. And then they deliberate. Then they got the charges, right? 34 counts, right? It's business record fraud in furtherance of a second crime. That's what they have to cycle their way through. That's the decision-making tree they have to make their way through. They can do it count by count. They can start with, do you think, they can do their own polling inside the room. Let's start off, do you think Donald Trump committed the crime of, because there's a jury verdict form they have to fill out one by one after they get through their process. And they have to go through and answer each of those questions as like a decision-making tree, which leads them inevitably to a verdict. And if the verdict is guilty, they say, then it's guilty. Don't worry about sentencing, sending to prison, even though that was an issue that was raised improperly, violation of the golden rule by Todd Blanche. Don't send my man to prison. You're not supposed to talk about punishment. It's only guilt. The judge in sentencing takes care of punishment. They don't take care of punishment. Whether it's a death penalty or it's prison or it's probation, that's not for the jury, that's for the judge. And the jury was instructed that what Blanche said about prison was improper and should be stricken from the record. You should not rely on that. Hopefully that cures the problem with the curative instruction. One last thing about jury science. Jury science tells us, and there is entire bodies of work and scholars that work on this and institutes that are devoted to this in law schools. Jury science tells us that juries make their decision at the beginning of the case. They make their decision usually after opening statements and after one witness or two witnesses. For me, that means it's in favor of the prosecution because their openings were strong and their first witness, David Pecker, was amazing. Amazing for the prosecution in terms of proving their case. And if that's the case, then they've just been waiting for the last 6 weeks for all the lawyers to stop talking and all the evidence to come in so they can make their decision. Now, that means if there's a holdout, they've been a holdout for that long. Question is, if there is a holdout, I don't know which juror, although you can speculate by how I've described some of them. If there's a holdout who won't vote to convict or to exonerate, whatever it is, is just against, swimming up against the tide. And because it has to be unanimous. We'll talk about that in a minute. It has to be unanimous, 12-0 to convict. If there's one holdout, you got a hung jury. The judge will give instructions to try to unhang them and make them deliberate to a resolution. But if they can't reach it, if it's 11-1 or 10-2, then he's not exonerated because they have to be 12-0 in one way or the other. Then it's a hung jury, and we got to try this case all over again in 3 or 4 months or whatever it's going to be. And that could well, of course, not happen before the November election. So we don't want that to happen if it can be avoided. But during a deliberation process, sometimes holdouts can be brought over to the other side. If there's effective advocates within the room who show the evidence and then kind of put them. But if they just dig in, and it's almost like jury nullification, they don't care what the facts say and what the law says, they're not voting for this guy to be convicted, then you got a problem. Then you have a problem that has to be examined at the end with an interview of the jurors to find out what really happened. And that they can do, and the prosecution can do to figure out how to retry that case if necessary. But we'll see. We'll follow it. Next day or two, we're going to have the verdict. Or we're going to have no verdict and a hung jury, one or the other. But I wanted you to know going in about the 12 and the jury selection process and the jury deliberation process. And then there'll be 2 buzzers. That means the jury's reached a verdict. If they have a question, it's 1 buzzer. For those that are listening on audio. They have questions, they'll get answered. The judge and the lawyers get together. They decide whether they're going to answer the question, how they're going to answer the question, if they're going to give them that answer to the question. And then 2 buzzers means we got a verdict. Everybody get back into the courtroom, reconvene. Jurors come in, and the foreperson and or the clerk reads out loud the jury verdict. And we'll follow it here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And then you can pick us up on audio podcast platforms, all the major ones. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.